Lunos. Everyone's talking about Lunos. People talk about Lunos like Lucifer himself came from the depths of hell and is preparing to scorch the earth with his terrifying powers. Ever since 15.1 dropped, there's so many people talking about Lunos and bajillion players asking me constantly on like Twitter or YouTube. Everyone seems to be prodding me, asking me, hey, Lucas, what do you think about Lunos? Talk about Lunos. What do you think about Lunos? You should talk about Lunos. Well, I'll talk about Lunos, alright. But I have a feeling that people expect me to talk about Lunos in a certain way, and you might be surprised that the title and the thumbnail of this video might not really what you would expect I would say about Lunos. Because let me tell you right now, I've seen majority of players' opinions on him, and I have disagreements. I have multiple hot takes about this unit, in fact. This whole thing might be a little confusing for some viewers who are out of the loop, so let me explain Lunos to you and why he's currently such a hot topic in the Battle Cats community. So, let's start with who exactly is Lunos? Lunos is the currently newest Uberfest exclusive unit in the Battle Cats. Uberfest and EpicFest exclusive Ubers are considered to be amongst one of the rarest units to get in Battle Cats aside from specific legend rares. Uberfest exclusive usually are a target all trait except traitless unit, but Lunos' target is 4 traits: Black, Angel, Relic, and Aku, and his role is akin to that of a tanker. Similar to Uberfest unit, the first form is a baby type unit, while the second form is a more adult version. Normally when we're talking about Uberfest unit, we're only gonna talk about the adult version, but for now, let's talk about both. The baby version of Lunos, Luno, is a relatively cheap, tanky-ish, low cooldown unit with resist and chance to knock back Black, Angel, Relic, and Aku. It also has some debuff immunities and a 10 seconds cooldown. And finally, it also has the ability of Conjure. Conjure is an ability that allows a unit to summon a spirit by tapping the unit icon when the unit is in the field. The spirit is an invulnerable unit that will launch an attack and disappear after launching said attack. Since the activation of the Conjure is by tapping the unit icon, that actually disables your unit to be spawned when one of the unit is already in the field. This means that you cannot have more than one of this unit in the field active. You need to have the unit in the field to die first before you can spawn another, so you can only have one Luno in the field. Now, the second form, Adult Lunos, has different stats, where he has around double the health of Baby Luno and 2 knockback count instead of 1. He also has a slightly better range, guaranteed chance to knockback, as well as better damage and better immunities. This is a common pattern among Fest units' first and second form, where the first form is a weaker, short-range unit, but cheaper and spammable compared to the Evolved form, while the Evolved form will have a heftier cost and more cooldown with generally better stats. Also, I don't know when to talk about this, but I just want to point this out. I saw a Twitter post that pointed out that Lunos uses his shoulder to bump his lance down to his hand, and I thought that's just a really neat detail. I just want to say Ponos is still cooking hard with the design and animation, but anyways, as I was saying, Lunos too followed the pattern of Uberfest units, being a more heavy-duty unit in the Evolved form compared to the spammable first form. However, Adult Lunos breaks one very important pattern. Baby Luno has 10 seconds cooldown. Lunos Evolved form cooldown is also 10 seconds. That's right, despite his overall better numbers, Lunos still has the cooldown that is absurdly short. Supposedly the balancing factor is the Conjure itself, since Conjure makes sure that only one Lunos may be in the field at a time, so he can't be insta-spammed when he's off cooldown. Also, Lunos' health for a tanker standard is actually not that high. In fact, it's actually relatively low for a tanker Uber, but it's still tanky enough to survive for at least 10 seconds, and definitely more against his target trait. So once the current Lunos in the field dies, you're almost sure to instantly able to spawn him again and again. Call him William Afton the way he always comes back. Now that we've discussed his base stats, let's talk about the insanity that is his Conjure. I've mentioned that Conjured Spirit, in general not just on Lunos, is an invulnerable unit that spawns on the Conjurer, and the spirit will launch an attack, then disappear after launching said attack. Spirits are completely invulnerable. It cannot die, cannot be debuffed or pushed back in any way, even by boss spawn knockback. Many Conjure units can use this to sometimes stall or protect certain units, not just by the spirit's attack itself, but just from the body block of the spirit. The spirit's damage is also pretty strong, scaling with the Conjurer's level. All spirits across all Conjurer units in the game have about the same stats. Same animation, same damage, same range. The only exception is Mamoluga, whose spirit has a longer range, and one more which I'll get into. The only difference between each spirits are their design and abilities. For example, Mamoluga Spirit, weak weakens all enemies. Izanagi's spirit knockbacks and slow all enemies. Axel's spirit has Metal Killer, but still has the strong base damage that every spirit has against other enemies, so it can still be used to damage things even outside of metals. Now, Lunos' spirit has a guaranteed knockback on all traits and a level 5 mini surge. This mini surge also has the knockback ability transferred to it. So this surge is essentially a lingering wall that will push enemies back over and over and over as long as it is active. It's straight up just a heart blocker for every enemies in the game. Oh, but hold on, you might say, doesn't Lunos only have 4 target traits? Yeah, but the spirit is an entirely different unit, and the spirit targets all traits. This is where Lunos gets kinda nutty. Lunos' conjure can be activated as long as he's in the field, including when it's on the knockback animation before his sprite disappears on death. Normally, even though Lunos would be off cooldown as soon as the previous Lunos dies, there would still be a gap in where Lunos wouldn't be able to respawn or not be able to protect the front line. But the Surge's wall of knockback allows you to stall enemies long enough to give Lunos a better chance to fill the gap again. On top of that, you also get to deliver extra damage from the spirit's attack and surge. And of course, you still get a great value from just being able to control most enemies and push them back every single time your Lunos dies, or every single time you spawn a Lunos. So the general loop is, you send Lunos, he tanks a relatively decent amount, maybe even pushing enemies if it hits his target traits. Then, as he's about to die, you conjure the spirit push the enemies back, then you get to respawn him again immediately, and he'll be able to protect your units again. You can kinda see why people are freaking out over this unit. He's quite a versatile unit to say the least, but it doesn't just end there. Lunos is just one part of the piece on what makes him a monster. Part of what makes this unit terrifying is his first form. Let's talk Baby Luno. First from Lunos, Baby Luno is also quite a beast. To refresh, Baby Luno is a cheaper but weaker version of Adult Lunos. He has worse health, damage, range, and so on, but he does have cheaper cost and faster speed. His conjure is actually one of the exceptions that I mentioned earlier about how not all conjures are the same. Unlike Adult Luno Spirit, Baby Luno Spirit actually has 1/3 of the usual spirit damage and even has less range. But the conjure spirit itself still retains the guaranteed surge and knockback that Adult Lunos has, although the surge spawn range is also a little bit lower. Baby Luno has multiple advantages for his conjure spam playstyle over Adult Lunos, which is that Baby Luno dies much easier. Which is a bit crazy to say, yeah, but in this context, dying faster means faster conjure loop. For one, Baby Luno only has 1 knockback count, allowing your Luno to die without needlessly repositioning, and he even have less range, less health, higher speed, all of which contributes to just a much needed consistent cycle of death and respawn. This makes Baby Luno more consistent in spamming his conjure ability, as he can just push enemies over and over and over faster, and he can do it with less cost. But since his health is way lower, he could actually die way faster, even like under 10 seconds. And in that case, you might not really have the protection that you might want, but that is also where Research Combo comes in. I've covered this combo in another video and why Research Combo is stupid good. You can check that video out if you want to understand. But essentially, Research Combo allows your Baby Luno to have a lower cooldown, giving you less gap or even no gaps between your Baby Luno spawn cycle. Baby Luno is a huge part in making Lunos as a unit a monster. So in conclusion, Lunos is a monster of a unit with 2 sides on him. Adult Lunos is a cockroach tanker with great versatility thanks to his 4 target trait and an extra ability to push enemies back every death. Baby Luno is an infinite loop of wall creator that knocks enemies back over and over and over every 10 seconds or even less. This combined created an extremely versatile unit that can create a near impenetrable defense and support all in one terrifying unit. Alright, now that we know what Lunos is and why he's so broken, I can finally move on into what I think about Lunos. And like I said, there's so much people that keeps on prodding me about what I think about Lunos, so here it is. Lunos. For me, Lunos, I think he's fine, to be honest. Yep, that's my view on Lunos. I think he's fine. Thanks for watching. sorry, video's not over. I gotta scratch the video a little bit over past the 10 minutes mark. And I know many of you might ask, like, hey, don't you like hate Dastly? You made a 50 minutes video hating on Dastly. Why don't you hate this new unit that's clearly broken beyond reasoning, just like you did to Dastly? And I get that. I think many people came in with the expectation that I'm gonna be like Luno's #1 hater or something. Like, Lucas isn't gonna like this. I bet he'll say that I want that twink hang with jumper cables. But yeah, no, I don't actually have a problem with this unit existing at all. Or at the very least, it doesn't bother me that much, you know? Like, for the most part, I think Lunos existing is fine. Something that I think not a lot of people understood when it comes to my disdain towards Dastly is that it's not entirely as simple as, oh, this unit is good and therefore I hate it. Because if that's the case, I would have talked about Phonoa, I would have talked about Dark Phono, I would have talked about Izanagi or Luna or whatever Broken Fest units that we've gotten over the years. People have constantly asked me to talk about these units too, and asking me why I didn't talk about them and when I have talked about Dastly. And there are several reasons to this. One is that Dastly was the main focus of my video, not because she's the strongest out of everything that we've gotten over the years, but because she is the first Uber to break such an insane barrier of power that we had on Uber balancing at the time when it was released 5 years ago. Secondly is that a big part of my dislike towards Dastly isn't just cause Dastly's strong, but also cause Dastly's just so boring. It's a really boring unit. She's not mechanically interesting or have some intricate weakness or anything. She's just a basic generalist with too much stats. There's very little to talk about her aside from just, well, she kills things and she doesn't die easily. It's just not really an interesting unit at all. And finally is that after all of the Fest units that were released over the years, all of those Phonoas, Dark Phonos, Lunas and all that stuff, there's some connection about them, you know? Let me tell you a secret about these units, alright? Listen to me very carefully as to what I'm about to say. Take note, it'll be on the test. All of these busted Fest units that has appeared the past couple of years, they're all Dastlys. Phono, that's Dastly. Dark Phono, that's a Dastly. Izanagi, arguably a Dastly. Luna, yeah, that's a Dastly. Dark Luna, that's also a Dastly. All of these units are the exact same units. They're big range units with big damage, standing far away from everything. Everything goes boom, 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 and then I win. They're all the same units. They are all just stat slops. They're Dastly slops. Don't get fooled by like tier listers discussing these units like, actually Izanagi is stronger because of this, or Dark Phono is actually slightly better than Dastly. Do not be deceived, all of these units are the exact same, they're all the exact same units. There's just so little reason to compare one with another aside from just playing favorites, and playing favorites are fine, it's fun. Nothing wrong with having a little fun, just as long as you don't get too serious about it. But in the end, it's just a power scaling discussion talking about basically which Uber has the biggest sexual appeal. The truth is, they're all the same. They are all Dastly slops. So for me, I see no point in talking about Phonoa or D-Phono separately from the Dastly video I've made when they're all the exact same units that I have the exact same problem with, you know? So when Lunos was released, I just think, oh, okay, a new Fest Uber that breaks stuff? Like, what, is this supposed to be new? We've had units that breaks the game for 5 years and we've only been getting copies of the unit trying to one-up the previous broken Uber for the past 5 years, and only now we get a new unit that breaks the game as usual and suddenly people are freaking out? Like, really? Only now you care about Fest Uber balancing for some reason? And I get that. I know some people would have said, oh, but Lunos is different. This is like an entirely different level of brokenness and whatnot. And, well, let's just say that I have my own opinions regarding to this as well. I have several hot takes about Lunos myself. I mean, I've already, like, given my hot take before, but I'm going to go more in depth about my reasoning here. So, let's get into it. One of my Lunos hot take is that Lunos isn't actually as broken as many players hype him out to be. Before you ram me with a truck, listen, not saying that Lunos isn't broken, but he's currently being talked like some kind of giga-terrorist demon from the 7th hell. Sometimes people describe very normal thing a unit like Lunos can do and hype it out like as it's new? Like as an example, stay with me and clear your mind for a little bit. Forget every preconceptions you have about Lunos for a minute, right? And just think about this from scratch. Imagine a Battle Cats unit who, at level 30, has has around 80,000 HP. At level 50, have around 120,000 HP. It also has a resistance ability giving them 4 to 5 times effective health against their target traits. So at level 50, their effective health could be like around 500,000 to 600,000. And to top it all off, they only have a 10 seconds cooldown. They also even have counters to debuffs. This unit, isn't this like a top tier unit? Isn't this unit so busted? Of course, I can attest to that because I've used such unit since 2017. Its name is Rocat. Yeah, Rocat. That's the stats of Rocat. Full talented, level 50 Rocat has 123,000 HP with times 4 effective health against red enemies and a 10 seconds cooldown. Plus, full talent gives it 70% freeze and slow resist. Yup, very broken unit. Of course, we haven't talked about plus levels on Row and talent orbs and such, so you know, it can go even higher. Okay, look here, I basically just wanted to point this out because I've seen so many people going like, oh my goodness, 100,000 health at 10 seconds cooldown? What was Pono's thinking? And I'm just here like, what do you mean? This is normal. Like, don't get me wrong, it's good, but it's nothing new. If anything, the health is actually on the lower side, especially compared to a lot of other tankers. But the way people phrase it makes it like Lunos is way more impressive than he actually is. Wow, this unit is so spammable with such an insane defense and relevant immunities whose maybe only weakness is the cost. You are describing talented Rice Ball Cat. Wow, this unit is a near perfect defense and also pushes enemies back. I can say the same to like Talented Cat God, also like Mizuririn, I guess. Wow, this unit is like a super spammable defense. You are describing almost every relevant meat shields in the game. Like, come on. Okay, obviously Lunos is way more than that, he's not as simple as that, but my point is that the way people describe Lunos sounds like crazy until you realize like majority of people describing Lunos is basically describing the job of a basic meat shield most of the time, and people lose their mind over it. But look, he can solo Uber carry like these 3-star UL stages, he can clear manic stages with low level support, he can like beat this and that merciless advent stage with just a basic team. What, like as of these past half a decade, your Dasleys and Phonos can't do the exact same thing? Breaking news, Fest Uber can carry most stages with a decent team. Wow, insane. Next you'll tell me water is wet. Wow, look at like this one Uber beating all craze cats at one with minimum support. Well, Gladios can do basically the same thing. And I've seen people call Gladios bad. You know, remember when people clip farmed the hell out of Last Boss one-shotting a bunch of bosses and players hyping it out like it's a top 1 unit in the game, and turns out to this day Last Boss just ends up being like an alright unit with very limited use, and to this day his like main sole purpose is to be clip farmed. Again, I'm not saying like this is the exact same thing as Lunos. Lunos is certainly busted, but my point is it's very easy to overhype units from just specific sentences to describe Lunos, or just very specific clips that you might see flying around on the internet. Every unit in the game can be overhyped this way, and most units has been overhyped this way. It's not that Lunos isn't busted, he is. I just don't think he's the mecha devil torture god of eternal fire hell that many players seems to say it is. So that's more or less my hot take, or well, one of my hot take. So here's another one. I think many people have many odd preconceptions about Lunos that maybe are exaggerated, but I'd like to put my own opinions here as well. So let's get into that. There's preconceptions that I think many players got wrong about Lunos, or perhaps just not exactly right. Now, I do think that Lunos is busted, but I think many players interpret Lunos as like a unit that can conjure spam every 10 seconds without any repercussions whatsoever. But that's not what Lunos is. Lunos is a versatile tanker which can provide fast defense with little gap. Aside from the obvious 10 seconds cooldown, one of his main biggest strength is actually his 4 target traits. Most tankers' balancing factors are having limited target traits. Most tankers in the game would pretty much be able to near perfectly stall even late game stages if all of the enemies in the stage are traits that they counter. Most of the time, relevant tankers would be able to just hold off long enough for you to get it off of cooldown as long as they are against only their target traits. Lunos having 4 target traits, it's actually a really big deal for a tanker like him. It gives him a much needed usability on just more stages. Against against his target traits, he's a great cockroach staller, but he can't exactly be spammed to conjure every 10 seconds either, because, well, he usually takes way longer than 10 seconds to die, which is a good thing for a tanker, yeah, but his role is not exactly a conjure spammer. Not that he needs the conjure spam anyways. Even if his spirit doesn't really do anything, I think he's still just an amazing tanker unit regardless. He's also not entirely a gapless staller either. People say you can fill his gap after dying to his spirit, yeah, but he actually have 2 gaps to fill. Lunos have 2 knockback count, so he has a gap from the enemies to push on both the first knockback and during his death. If you plan to use the conjure on his death, then you have to rely on the other units that you have in the team to fill in the gap on his knockback count and vice versa. On super hard pushing stages, sometimes even erasers might not be able to fill in the gap. You can fill the gap by timing Boulder Cat right as he gets knocked back, but you basically need to predict the exact timing on when he gets knocked back by paying attention to how much enemies are hitting him and whatnot, and it's basically not quite an easy job. He still stalls super well on his own for what it's worth, but he's not exactly a 100% immovable wall either. Outside of his target traits, yes, you can use him to conjure spam since he does die pretty fast, but I think the cost you pay to do that is way too much, and it actually limits his usage due to its cost. A lot of later game stages in UL or ZL or even like higher star UL have quite a limited amount of money, and paying 3,600 every 10 seconds is very much not feasible. Killing enemies to gain money isn't always reliable either, as some late game enemies are super tanky and don't just drop too much cash. Outside of his target traits, you pretty much would be required to use Rich Cat power up everywhere you go to make him even workable at the first place. But at that point, if you're using Rich Cat, there's probably better alternatives to beat the stages faster. He also have some problems against certain specific enemies too. Some enemies that are immune to knockback or immune to surge doesn't get affected by his conjure, so his imperfect gap can be even bigger. Sages can be a problem too. Sage has natural knockback resist, so if they're too close on where the spirit spawns, there can just be times where they are not pushed far enough into the surge spawn, and they would just essentially be able to avoid the wall. This can even happen to some non-Sages melee pusher if your surge spawn is too far. This even applies to some Aku enemies with Aku shield, since Akus, when they have their shields up, cannot get knockback, especially units with strong shield like Fallen Bear. Even though Lunos is an anti-Aku unit, he can kinda struggle in keeping them in check. He also have problems against fighting most zombie enemies, since if he's stuck fighting in the front lines, then you can't spawn another one of him to protect your base from zombies until the Lunos in the field dies first. His one in the field restriction is also really terrible against aliens with warp. Since he's not warp immune, aliens with warp can still push him away and remove his defenses, or even just move him forward. Even worse, if the warp enemy takes him out for a long time like Astromeda or 1-1, he would just be gone for a long time. Since he's not counted as dead if warped away, you'll be stuck with not being able to spawn him just for a good amount of time, and you're losing out Lunos for a while. If the stage is warp heavy, Lunos could actually just end up being a deadweight in your lineup. And finally, one other problem that he have is that he mainly only functions well when you're fighting close to base. If you're fighting further away, he'll have to travel a long time to get to the front lines every time he dies because his speed isn't actually that high. He would stall better when you're fighting close to the base to reduce travel time, and that's mostly fine, but it can get really messy when the stage has powerful LD enemies, especially Tacky and Hacky, that can just straight up kill your base if they get even remotely close to your base. Sometimes you might just lose from something like Croakley even on like higher star UL or something. There's usually much better common tankers or stallers than Lunos against these enemies. He's still an insanely good unit, don't get me wrong, I just want to point out he's not exactly a perfect foolproof unit. He's not a I can spam conjure every 10 seconds unit, and he's not a nothing in the game can push me or something kind of unit, you know? He's just a really good tanker. And he struggles a little bit outside of his target traits, but that's just similar to most specialized tankers, and he still works pretty good in that regard, so he's still good, but he's not fully foolproof. But while I do think that Lunos is generally a somewhat fine unit, I will say that's probably not really the big problem here. There are certain players who are hyper fixated about adult Lunos 10 seconds cooldown that they overlook the fact that he's not even like the true source of the evil here, because instead that goes to Baby Luno. So, I will say, while I don't think that Lunos is super messed up, I do think that Baby Luno is kinda messed up. Baby Luno is actually the monster of a conjure spamming and can push enemies beyond belief. Basically like an infinite stock of Breaker Blast that actually cycles every 10 seconds and even less with Research combo. He's not exactly a full tanker, but in a way that can actually help him a little bit. He's just a really versatile unit since he's mainly only used for the Spirit, and the Spirit targets all traits, so his general performance isn't really dependent on his enemy traits. He doesn't have the problem of having 2 knockback counts, so he actually has less gaps to fill than adult Lunos. And if timed properly, he could theoretically straight up just have a gapless stalling for most enemies in the game. He still does have some issues that Lunos has against specific enemies or stages, things like enemies with immunities to Surge or immunities to knockback or strong Aku shields, or zombie stages, or alien warps, and LD base killer enemies, those sort of stuff. They can still really mess with Luno. But other than that, I'd say he's generally more reliable to stop enemy pushes than adult Lunos a lot of the times. Like, yeah, he have problems with like alien warps or zombies and stuff, but he does die easier compared to adult Lunos, so you can get him back in the field faster. Overall, Baby Luno have way more potential to break the game. He's totally broken in the right hand, but keyword is on the right hand. You see, a big part on Baby Luno's strength is the fact that you get to use his conjure insanely often. Yeah, but that's also partially a problem. What do I mean by that? Well, compared to how adult Lunos plays, if you are going to play with Baby Luno, you have much less room for mistakes. Since your only form of stalling with Baby Luno is his conjure, you fully rely on the conjure to do any form of stalling with this guy. If you mess up the timing, whether it be too fast or too slow, or you miss the timing completely, you could just be left with a big gap. I mean, like, sure, big deal, you can still fill the gap with other units, yeah, but if you're bringing Baby Luno, you'll probably have like half of your lineup filled with Research combo if you want to fully make Luno work, so your options are actually generally more limited. Obviously, you can bring like Boulder Cat too, but then there comes another problem, which is that Baby Luno does very little damage. I mean, he's a staller, why is this a problem exactly? Well, if you're filling your lineup with just Research combo, Baby Luno, and a bunch of meat shields, the majority of your lineup is just not going to be able to do any damage. Sure, Baby Luno isn't extremely expensive, but if you have to keep on just spamming a bunch of meat shield and also Research Luno, it's still going to be a huge money sink. And if you're not able to deliver out much damage, then you won't be able to get your money back from killing enemies. You should be really careful in like managing your money in both what kind of defensive unit you want to send out to help Lunos, or what kind of offensive unit that you want to send out to kill the enemies. All while trying to make sure that you manage your money well and making sure that you don't miss your conjure every time. And dealing with the fact that you're probably going to have to fight in the stage for way longer than usual because nothing in your lineup is gonna deal that much damage. So in a way, there is like this theoretically you can't lose, but also it's gonna take forever for you to win at the first place. This is not gonna be a problem in like every stage. If the stage only has like slower enemies, then it's usually much easier to handle things with Luno. But in stages with tighter money and faster enemies, you have to be basically constantly locked in for like 10 minutes straight. And most other players probably would just be able to blitz through most of the stages in the game way faster anyway, so why go through that trouble? It's like, yeah, it's fine, Baby Luno would theoretically be able to stall out a lot of stages by itself, but the question isn't like, what can Luno beat, but more so, can the players really use Luno? Can they time their conjure perfectly every time and manage their money well every time? Do they even have the patience to use Baby Luno to be stuck in a same stage for like 5 minutes, timing your units over and over? Can most BattleCats players even figure out how to use Luno at the first place? I don't think it's like the most difficult things in the world, mind you. I think it's relatively simple, but do most players really prefer doing this? Like, carefully timing your units for like 10 minutes straight compared to just popping off your Dastly with like 2 erasers, turn on cat CPU, and win the stage in a minute? Like, I don't know about that. These are also a problem that adult Lunos have, mind you, but I think adult Lunos can at least still work as a generic tanker that's not as like effort intensive to use. He's not fully reliant on like Research combo, he's not fully reliant on timing every 10 seconds, he's just a good tanker in general. So while I do think that Baby Luno is theoretically more messed up than adult Lunos, I do think that Baby Luno also requires much better execution and planning from the player to maximize his potential too. And And so that relates to my next point. I think Luno and Lunos' bustedness is more comparable to several already existing busted units that isn't like the Fest units. These are units that, while crazy busted, turns out to be not as dominating in the player's picks. Luno and Lunos is broken in a way that isn't the same as the usual Uberfest kind of broken. What do I mean by this? Well, let's get into it. I'd like to compare Lunos, or maybe more specifically Baby Luno, to two units to talk about my point. One is Research Rock, two is BahaBlast. These are two very powerful units and strategies that are generally considered to be very busted. Boulder Cat paired with Research Combo and Bahamut with its explosion talents are super broken units in defense and offense respectively. And yet, after using them for a long time, I don't feel like they necessarily make the game worse either. Like, yeah, they're broken, but they're not the kind of broken that's entirely too easy or too boring either. Both BahaBlast and Research Rock are actually generally pretty easy to use, yeah, but there is actually quite a bit of depth that a player can explore to understand on how to use both of these units properly if you want to maximize their potential. And yet, even just that little bit of depth still got a lot of players tripped up on how to use Rock and BahaBlast properly, to the point where most stages ends up still being a challenge even for majority of players that have both of these units. Even I still struggle on certain stages with both of these units. Despite their reputation, I actually rarely see casual players using Research Rock in the lineup or players utilizing BahaBlast in their, finest form. And a big part of it is simply because of the lack of ease of use. Yeah, BahaBlast is an extremely powerful and disruptive rusher. The explosion allows you to pierce through enemies, making timing him much easier. But he's still a glass cannon that gets one or two shotted by most relevant enemies in the game, which can instantly end his chain if he's not properly supported or properly timed. And honestly, chaining Bahamut is still just really fun, blast or not. In fact, the explosion talent sometimes even just opens up some really funny strats in certain stages, so it just opens up possibility of new creative strats. And Research Rock, even though Research Rock can be boiled down to just spam it, there's actually some understanding needed on when to time Research Rock or to how to revolve a team around it, or when to time certain things around it, especially around just the lineup building around Rock itself. Also, Research Rock's strength being basically being able to stall every enemy in the game near perfectly. That's basically essentially describing Luno's strength too, so And yet, despite that, I rarely see any players in the game actually using Research Rock in the wild. That's something I rarely ever see, even though it's stupidly broken. Baby Luno in comparison does have a better payoff for using him properly compared to the likes of BahaBlast and Research Rock, sure, but he isn't exactly a 100% complete turn-off brain unit to use either, He does have a bit of depth on knowing when to use his Conjure, or what form you should use them, or what team you should use them on, and so on and so on. Both Baby Luno and Adult Lunos also have optimal timing on when to use their Conjure to the fullest. A great timing to Conjure with Lunos is a split second right before Lunos dies, and you can kinda do that by predicting when he's going to die by analyzing all of the enemies that are hitting him, which enemy types he resists, how many times he's getting hit by which enemies, and so on and so on. If you Conjure too fast, there will be a bigger gap. Too slow, then the spirit spawns a little bit backwards. Way too slow, and you just miss it completely. But sometimes if you're against fast pushers or maybe even zombies that are behind, then you can delay the Conjure so that the spirit spawns backwards, so that more enemies are more likely to be held by the surge spawn, even if it means that you're going to be covering less range, etc, etc. Most of the time this really doesn't matter that much, but you can at least kinda see that there are still a little bit of depth into Lunos' Conjure. I'm sure that most players have the capabilities to get a lot of value out of Lunos, but it's partially less of something like what a player is capable of doing, and more so what the player is willing to do. I'm confident that most players can use Lunos properly, but I'm less confident that most players even want to use Lunos properly. For more late game players, it's probably going to be naturally easy to squeeze value out of Lunos, but many more casual players would probably going to have to learn a lot about general lineup building and balancing and money management and timing and so on to make Lunos work. And if they ultimately think it's too much of a headache, they're probably better off using the Dastly slops, which you can easily get value out of without having to worry about a lot of things. While on the other side, if they are willing to understand how Lunos work and how to build the team around Lunos and stuff, I feel like that's a good thing, I feel like that's good. But honestly, I think in the end, I'm still fairly confident that a lot of casual players probably wouldn't really be able to pull off Lunos to like his full potential. Not only because we've seen this from like BahaBlast and Research Rock, like being broken and yet still not being used, but also because I've seen some clips from like JP casual players using Luno or Lunos, and sometimes they still end up getting destroyed on like some simple UL stages. If casual JP players can't auto-win every stages with Luno and Lunos, I don't think EN players will. I think Lunos, despite how broken he is, still takes way more effort to be broken at the first place compared to the already existing broken Ubers that we have, if that makes sense. Plus, Lunos is a much more defensive unit, so beating most stages while relying on Lunos and Luno will just have you stuck fighting in the stage way longer than you would have if you just use other broken generalists with high damage instead. Like, he's not a win hard unit, he's a not lose unit. And honestly, I don't think most players would have the patience to use him, not gonna lie. So yeah, I really do think that a lot of casual players wouldn't really break the game with him or something like that. Like, maybe you can use them like alongside your broken units, but I feel like at that point, you probably wouldn't really need to have Luno in the lineup in the first place. Part of the reason on why like the Dastly Slops and the Phono-like units are much more used is because they're way easier to use. It's just spawn them, spam meat shields, no need to care about timing or money management whatsoever. You'll eventually win. Are like the Dastly Slops units like less impactful than peak performance Lunos? Probably? But it's so much easier to use the Dastly Slops units and you get way more value out of them without needing to turn your brain on at the first place. That's what separates the brokenness of the Dastly Slop units and something like Research Rock and BahaBlast. And based off what I've seen, I think Lunos might not be that different. Also, another thing is that while, yeah, the Dastly-like units and whatnot cannot beat like literally every stages in the game and such, and you might say, well, Lunos technically dominates more stages than these Ubers, so he's way stronger. The thing about like the Dastly-like units and why they're so strong and stuff is because these Ubers covers the weakness of non-Uber units. Non-Uber units often have like a hard time brute forcing higher range enemies, and the current top tier Dastly Slops covers that very easily. Meanwhile, the Dastly-like units are generally weaker to fast melee pushers and such, but fast melee pushers are usually enemies that are fodders to non-Uber units. Together, it's very easy to cover like every stages in the game with just using a basic lineup to cover each other's weakness. Like sure, a solo Lunos working alone technically works on more stages than just Dastly and stuff, and that might look more impressive, but a lot of the stages that he works on that the Dastly Slops don't work on are like stages that would get melted by just spamming Can and Courier anyways, so it's not like it matters that much. Obviously, there are exceptions, but majority of the time, that's usually the case. But yeah, I think that's more or less my thoughts on Lunos' brokenness and my kind of like hot takes on Lunos, I guess. So let's wrap it up. Let's like have a more concise thought about Lunos now. So, what do I ultimately think about Lunos? Well, first let me talk about what most players think about Lunos. I asked you guys in the community post about what you guys think about Lunos, and I do think that majority of people seems to think that Lunos is a bit too much. Some people seems to recommend like ways to nerf Lunos. Most people seems to just say increase the cooldown, which I personally heavily disagree. Like, if you do that, you're just creating Garu with less target traits. I do have my own ideas to nerf Lunos, but maybe I'll save it for another time. That could be like an interesting video topic actually. I could be like talking about ideas on how to balance units or whatever. That could be fun. But maybe like, you know, another video. But anyways, for me personally, I do think that Lunos wouldn't actually be that bad in the hand of most casual players. At least not in a way that it's like enough to warrant a freakout or demanding a nerf, which by the way Ponos would absolutely not do, just to be clear. They didn't nerf Dastly 5 years ago and they just made clones of her over the years. Why would they start nerfing now? I know Dastly is normalized nowadays, but remember, Dastly came out more or less during the time when our top tier Ubers include things like Gao or Aphrodite, which is cool, but it also includes Catman. Freaking Catman, bro. That's the kind of Ubers we roll when Dastly came out. So yeah, they're not nerfing Lunos, dude. Besides, I also think it's a little bit foolish to think that Luno's 10 seconds cooldown is a mistake. It's 100% part of the design. And you know what? I like Lunos for it. Lunos works in a very funny way that I really like. When I first saw this unit, I wasn't actually mainly thinking like, oh wow, like a broken fest tier Uber. No, when I first saw this unit, my initial thought was, wow, this unit is mad funny and potentially one of the most mechanically coolest Ubers in the entire game. Like, yeah, of course, I think he's powerful and all that stuff, but my mind didn't go instantly to like, wow, this unit's gonna like ruin battle cats or whatever. My mind's going to like, wow, this unit is like really interesting. Like, I can't wait to test the unit. And then I test the unit myself and I was right. I had fun testing Lunos. It's actually really cool to try to maximize Luno in a lot of the time. Timing his conjure by guessing when he will die by observing the enemies in the field, seeing which enemies hits Lunos, guessing when exactly he's going to die from like basing it off from enemies animation. It feels just really fun. It feels really good. And using him is actually really engaging. It's a literal back and forth where we pretty much always have to focus in on the game. A huge difference compared to like the Dastly slop supers where all you do is plop them in, fill the lineup with 3 meat shield, turn on cat CPU and win. But when I'm using Lunos, I actually felt like I'm engaged with the game. He's easily one of the most fun units I've ever used in the game. So imagine my surprise when reading people talking about Lunos and people call Lunos boring. I'm actually baffled by how many people call him boring. Like, really? I just don't see it. Like, yeah, he's busted, sure, but mechanic-wise, design-wise, I think at this point in the game, he's a unit with like amongst one of the biggest def you can have in terms of like maximizing his usage. You can use him as a generic defensive option and have your like team protect him or keep him alive longer, but doing so will reduce your damage output due to being unable to respawn for conjure damage. You can use him to like die faster to give him minimum support in order to keep conjuring, but doing so will like leave you gaps and like potentially eat up your cash. He just can be used in different ways depending on how the players interact with him or how the players build a team around him, and I just think it's all so fascinating. There's so little units in the game with this kind of engaging mechanic. Like, sure, it definitely would be much more preferable if he's a more balanced unit with a more balanced stats. I absolutely would prefer that, yeah. But just seeing like the kind of idea that Ponos gave to this unit is just super interesting. I think Ponos actually cooked hard on designing how Lunos work, at least in terms of like the idea that the unit have. Definitely not so much in the balancing factor, but if they can like release another unit with a very similar idea like Lunos with a better balancing factor without removing what makes Lunos, that would be really cool. For me, Lunos just works in such a fascinating way that I don't even really mind him being broken. This unit can be like the top 1 Uber in the game or top 1 unit in the game and I wouldn't even be mad because at least it's an actual cool top tier unit, especially just comparing to the likes of like whatever top tier units we've had over the years. At least Lunos works in a very entertaining way, so yeah. You heard it here, folks. I like Lunos. And I hope I don't regret saying this. Who knows, Ponos might just make this worse in the end. I don't know. I hope Ponos doesn't prove me wrong. But for now, yeah, this unit is mad funny and I actually really like him for it. It's definitely kind of funny for me to see that I'm seeing a lot of people reacting the same way most boomer players reacted 5 years ago. Oh no, Ponos is killing our game with the new Fest Ubers. There's a huge power level spike. And I'm here sitting on the sideline thinking, if you cared about Uber balancing, you're way too late on that, buddy. You're 5 years too late. But yeah, I think this video is not something that a lot of people expect. Most people seems to be expecting me to be like, wow, this unit sucks, it's so busted, it sucks, I'm going to curse this unit to death or whatever. But yeah, no, I think Lunos is fine, and if anything, I actually kind of like it. Well, for now anyways, who knows, my opinion might change in the future. But hey, all I'll say is, Dark Lunos is coming, and you should just be glad that Epic Fest units doesn't have a baby form. If Dark Lunos has a baby form, you can just alternate between Baby Luno and Dark Baby Luno. That's when it's actually over. But anyways, that's where I'll end it for now. Thank you all so much for watching and sticking around. I hope you learned a thing or two from here. I don't really have any motivation words for now, I'm sorry, but hey, whatever you're doing good, lad. But yeah, that's all, I'll end it for now. If you're interested in more Battle Cats content or more other games content, I cover a lot of other games in my channel, so you can check that out. But yeah, like and subscribe, ding that bell, and that's about it. I'll catch you another time. See ya.